All right, so for those of you who are blissfully unaware of what Metal Gear Solid is, it's a video game by Hideo Kojima who has, let's call them interesting ideas about gameplay. So like, there's the stealthy cardboard box. There's the gun that has an infinite amount of ammo because, and I quote, the internal feed mechanism is shaped like an infinity symbol. If you have ever thought, I need to rescue the President of the United States, but he's behind this locked door, so I will pull out my remote-controlled missile launcher, fire a missile through air ducts, past the head of the president, into a bank of computers behind him, blowing them up so I can unlock the door and rescue the president. Congratulations, you are exactly as insane as Hideo Kojima. So what this panel is like, the rules for this panel are, it has to be something that a real-life, like military or intelligence agency or government put real money into, and it's Hideo Kojima approved, in the sense that I feel like these things are real-life things that would not be out of place in a Metal Gear game. So, let's go back to World War II. Basically from 1939 to 45 was the Battle of the North Atlantic. Like there's a saying, like armies march on their stomachs, like professionals talk about strategy, amateurs talk about strategy, but professionals talk about logistics. If you want to win a war, you have to ship a lot of like supplies from one side of the ocean to the other side of the ocean.
You know, Josh, now that you say that, Death Stranding makes a lot more sense.
It's the most realistic military game ever released. So one of the main problems was that the US, like and other countries, like the US was shipping all this material across the Atlantic, and German U-boats or submarines kept sinking tons of material. And if you want an idea of like how effective submarines are as a weapon, you can see like this chart is like ships sunk by submarine and then ships sunk by everything else in the war. On the right-hand side, that's like the Pacific theater. It's like that huge bar chart is Japanese ships sunk by submarine, and then every other column is every other form of sinking a ship. So like submarines, really effective. Submarines had a weakness in World War II. They're vulnerable to air attack because like batteries sucked back then and you could only stay underwater for like a few hours before you died. The major problem was that there's a huge shortage of steel. So, steel sinks, but
Really?
ice does not sink. So there was a proposal, they actually built a prototype in Canada of an ice aircraft carrier. Now this is not as stupid, this is dumb. This is not as dumb as it sounds. There's something called Pikerite, invented by Jeffrey Pike, where it's like you mix water and wood pulp and freeze it, you can build pretty durable materials. Like it's not unrealistic to make a ship out of this. There's one problem with ice ships, which is that, yeah, ice melts. Way to steal my thunder.
Oh, there's a solution to that.
Okay, these guys were not complete idiots. They are, like, the guy's like, okay, ice melts. We'll put refrigeration plants inside the ship. Well, refrigeration plants require steel. And then like they also are heavy, so you need to add more steel to support the like structural weight in your ice ship. There's a report that was finally written where someone's like, the reason that we didn't go through with this plan was because the amount of steel needed for refrigeration plants was more than the amount of steel needed to make a ship. They found this out after they built the prototype, and it took 3 years to melt.
Yeah. So that's cool and all, having a like floating aircraft carrier, but I think we could do better than that. How about a flying aircraft carrier? So before World War II, we thought airships were going to be the way of the future because they have some advantages. They can stay in the air without using any power. They also have some disadvantages. Airships are pretty slow. And to combat this, they thought, hey, why don't we put a fighter escort on the aircraft carrier? So these airplanes here are F-9C Sparrowhawk fighter planes, and these were put into service around 1929. And these were used, they were launched and retrieved on these giant airships. And they could be used for as fighters to defend the airship. They could be used for scouting as well, since the airship's pretty slow. You can increase its range, get places to observe them faster. And there's some pretty cool things here. So there's this trapeze structure you can see, which the airplane would be lowered on and then dropped from. And the airplane would return to the airship by the pilot would have to fly up to this trapeze and then latch the structure on the top of his airplane onto it and then get pulled up into the aircraft carrier. And apparently this was actually not as difficult to do as it sounds. And it worked pretty well overall. In fact, it worked so well that at some point they removed the landing gear from the airplanes and replaced it with extra fuel tanks because the planes are never going to land on a runway. So the problem with this was actually the airship itself, because airships have another weakness, which is weather, which really limits their use, as you can imagine. And both of the airships which had these fighter planes on them, the USS Macon and Akron, both crashed due to problems with weather. And the military hasn't used airships since then. But later, we had strategic bombers. And strategic bombers at the time had a similar problem where they need fighter escorts, but the range of fighters is not long enough to fly by themselves. So they thought, hey, why don't we attach a fighter plane to each one of our bombers? So they experimented with taking the B-36 Peacemaker here, and this was around 1948. And this is a very large airplane. So on the left there is a B-29 Superfortress, and that's the airplane which dropped the atomic bomb. And you can go see this airplane at the Udvar-Hazy Center Air and Space Museum over in Virginia. And it's a big airplane when you see it in person. And you can see it's just dwarfed by the Superfortress there. So it's still a lot smaller than like an aircraft carrier or a Zeppelin, though. So they had to build a special kind of fighter jet. Yeah, this is called an XF-85 Goblin, appropriate name. And there's a saying in aerospace: if it looks right, it flies right, and it definitely applies here because they didn't work very well. They used a similar trapeze mechanism to the airships, but because this is many years later, everything's flying faster, they have more power. It was really difficult for the airplanes to launch and dock from this mechanism. And shortly after, they invented and perfected aerial refueling, so the planes, the fighter escorts, didn't have to remain attached to the bombers the whole time. They could go off to a tanker aircraft and refuel. Now,
I was like, well, so like if you're gonna put an aircraft carrier, you can either put it on the water,
okay,
or you can put it above the water,
okay,
or you can put it
under the water. Yeah, that's the logical next step. Actually, so we're going back in time again. You know, I kind of ordered this by ridiculousness. But yeah, that submarines. Actually, a lot of countries looked into this idea because it's really attractive. In World War II, if like air power was supreme, still is today, but imagine if you're planning strategy and you can just have airplanes like up here behind your enemy line, even if it's only a few of them. That's really powerful. And so yeah, a lot of countries researched and developed this, but only one country actually deployed it in World War II. Does anyone want to guess who? Good guess, but no. You have to think like a weeb because it was the Japanese. Yeah, there was the I-400 class submarine, and it had an airplane hangar. So basically, there was this tube on the top of the submarine, which was watertight, and it would launch seaplanes. So these planes would have to be disassembled and stuffed into this tube. but it could hold, I think, like 3 or 4 of these airplanes.
We got some time at the end. We will get your questions like when we finish the slides. Okay, so from planes, there's not a real order here, but like keeping with like the Metal Gear theme. How many people here played Metal Gear Solid 5? Nice. So in video games, like military dogs are adorable, and of course in real life, military dogs are actually just adorable. So dogs have been used in warfare since like ancient times. Like the Romans use them as sentries. You can use them for tracking. You can use them to like detect bombs. Although like a person with a really bad sense of humor would be like, "That's not a bomb dog. That's a bomb detecting dog." Well, in World War II in Soviet Russia, nobody had a sense of humor. So the Russians were like, "Okay, we're being attacked. We have lots of dogs. The Germans have tanks. What if we put bombs on dogs and train them to like run at tanks under them and then blow them up?" So first of all, this is like just gratuitously evil. Second of all, they trained the dogs on Russian tanks. So in the heat of combat, the dogs would get really nervous and then run towards the familiar looking tanks. Yeah, so I hate to say it, but in Soviet Russia, dog bombs you. Too soon? All right. That's sad, so yeah, I feel sad, but on the plus side, like also paradogs were a thing. So if you need your dogs like as part as like an airborne assault, and you need to get your dogs behind enemy lines, you put parachutes on your dogs. And like this is probably terrifying, but like the dog's wagging his tail, so I think he's having a good time. He's fine. See, he's fine.
I'd be more worried about him getting dragged with a parachute.
So what I discovered was like, this is obviously ridiculous, and there's no way they still do something like this. I found out that they just tandem jump with dogs now. Yeah, so no, this is just a real, like it's not really popular, but it's a real thing, and I'm just glad that this made it to
Do you know the
day.
dog gets its own radio?
I didn't know the dog.
Yeah, the handler can talk to the dog.
So what about cats? A lot of this stuff comes out of the Cold War or World War II because that was a crazy time in history. So the basic idea here was that the CIA really wanted to spy on the Russian embassy in DC. And they're thinking like, well, how can we like somehow sneak a radio transmitter into the Soviet embassy? So someone at the CIA, like they spent about $10 million on this project, and they had to like invent a surgical procedure to like implant a radio transmitter and like the power source and then like the actual microphone into a cat, and then with the hope that they could release the cat and then like I don't think this was well thought out, but like they'd release the cat and like the cat would somehow like go to the Russian embassy and hang out, and then they could like transmit stuff back.
It's so easy to get a cat to do what you want.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's really easy. So anyway, what happened to this project was they did the surgical procedure, they released the cat, it started walking across the street and then got hit by a taxi. And that, as far as I can tell, that was the end of the project. Okay, so what about pigeons? So pigeons have been used also since ancient times. There's the homing pigeon where I need to send a message. So I like put a small message, I attach it to the pigeon, I release the pigeon flies home. This was popular in World War I, like when like radio went down sometimes. And then the British actually like award the Dickens Medal to like animals that display conspicuous gallantry. This makes way too much sense for Metal Gear Solid games, so I'm not going to talk about this anymore. Meanwhile, in World War II, aircraft had a ceiling of about like 6.5 miles. The best technology of the era, so under ideal circumstances, theoretically, you could drop a bomb within like 23 meters of your target. Realistically, you're lucky to get 300 meters within your target. That's how your blast range. And meanwhile, B.F. Skinner was doing research on how to train pigeons to respond to like operant conditioning. Do you see where I'm going with this? So the idea was, let's take a glider, fill it up with explosives, train a pigeon to peck at a target, put the pigeon in the nose cone, and then release this glider, and now you have the pigeon-guided missile. So that reaction is exactly what B.F. Skinner said he got. Funding got pulled for this during the war, although what's really weird about it, funding got pulled for this, then the project was revived in 1948 after the war ended, and they funded it until 1953 when like electronics finally got better than pigeons. So I couldn't find much information on how successful this actually was, but they funded it for 7 years. Then again, like there's a lot of projects that they funded for 7 years, so it's not saying that much. So bats. Yeah, there's a lot of animals. There's a lot of weird stuff done with animals here. The basic idea here was we'll release thousands of bats with incendiary bombs attached to them. They will fly. They'll gnaw through the wire that holds the incendiary bomb. It will then drop and then light up on stuff on fire later.
Yeah, and an important part of this is the military was well aware that most of Japan, their infrastructure was all built out of wood. And unfortunately, that meant that they thought of fire. And it was like, yeah, fire would be a good way to attack Japan.
So other than like the sheer ridiculousness of this project got canceled when a large number of bats escaped, set fire to a hangar and a general's car. There's also a project to bomb volcanoes, and then I think that one was canceled because the problem is like if you bomb a volcano, it doesn't just erupt. But that was really proposed. Skip bombing. So there's a saying in the military where it's like, if you want to sink a ship, you sink a ship by making water holes, not by making air holes. Unfortunately, in World War II, the Japanese had torpedoes that blew up, whereas like the American torpedoes kind of like hit the side of the ship and then like sank apologetically. Early in the war, due to quality control issues, over 30% of American torpedoes just didn't work. So someone had this proposal of like, hey, if we need to blow holes in the side of a ship, and we have bombs that do blow up, why don't we just skip the bombs across the surface of the water like stones? This is obviously ridiculous.
I'm noticing a theme here, Josh. You're not going to tell me that this worked.
So here's a training video of them trying to do skip bombing. So, yeah. It is 1940s, but so like, you fly in low, you drop the bombs, and they skip.
Wow, they really do. Skipping like stones.
Yes!
Yeah. You might have also heard of the dam busters. I think the Mythbusters tested that. Yeah, I know they tested Pykrete too. But yeah, the dam busters, they basically made a bomb specialized for skipping on water to take out dams.
So, as you mentioned in this video, this absolutely ridiculous concept worked really well. In the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, something like about like less than 100 bombers attacked a Japanese convoy, and they sank 8 destroyers, 8 troop carriers. They basically wiped out an entire convoy and lost 6 aircraft. So skip bombing actually works. Later in the war, they fixed the torpedoes so they could use torpedoes, but. So, I don't know if the British actually heard about this from Americans, but the idea was, if we can skip bombs across water, can we also roll explosives across land? So the Great Pangeon Drum was invented by the British Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. That was really its name. Basically, yes. This was the Great Pangeon Drum. In the center was a bunch of explosives, and then like on the outside rings were a bunch of rockets. And like the idea is you light up the rockets, and then the rockets will like rapidly propel this thing, and then just like go right up a beach and then blow up the defenses. So, fortunately, like we actually have video of them like attempting this. It's going.
It's going. Come on. You can do it. Uh-oh. Oh, no. Somebody play some Eurobeat, because we got Tokyo drifting.
Fortunately, no one was hurt, but they canceled this project after the first test.
Ooh.
All right.
We'll get to that later.
So, Ghost Army.
Yeah, just like in Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah. All right, so on D-Day, so June 6, 1944, there was 130,000 troops landed in Normandy. And meanwhile, the German army was mostly defending Calais up here. So there's a couple of reasons, but why would they bother defending this one region when the real attack was happening somewhere else? The answer was the 23rd headquarters of Special Troops, but nicknamed the Ghost Army. And the idea was, it was World War II. They hired a bunch of artists, architects, set designers, and actors to be a fake army. They had fake trucks, fake artillery pieces, fake tanks, just inflatable. You can see 4 guys picking this up. A photograph of this leaked, and when asked about this, the official response from the army was, "Our troops are very strong." So they deployed this fake army on over 20 missions, and in a couple hours, they could fake the presence of tens of thousands of troops. And this worked. There's not a joke here. This actually just worked. It's oh yeah, we're gonna deploy a bunch of Hollywood set designers to war and fake an army. America.
Yeah. Well, more like Britain. Yeah.
They did, and I want to point out that I don't have a slide for simulated radio traffic.
Yeah, kind of hard to represent in visual form. Yeah.
Oh, speaking of radio.
Yeah, speaking of radio, and the British being sneaky, so the Brits, I don't know if they were the ones, it escapes me if they were the ones to invent radar, but they were certainly the first ones to use it to great effect. And in the Battle of Britain, where the air defense, they used on the left there, you can see one of the radio towers from what they called Chain Home, which was a whole system for defending the British Isles. So the Germans would fly in their bombers at night, and the British could still detect them coming in, even though they couldn't see them. And later, they were able to miniaturize it and put it on fighters to create night fighters, so they could more easily locate the aircraft and attack them, even if the pilots couldn't see them visually. And actually, other countries had radar as well, even the Germans, but the Germans mostly only used radar for targeting systems. They'd put it on their ships, and they'd be able to detect range to targets to fire their guns more accurately. So the Germans knew about radar, but they didn't know how the British were using it, and the British wanted to keep it that way. So they thought, well, the Germans are going to get suspicious that our pilots are so good at finding their aircraft at night, so they came up with a cover story, and you might have even heard this story because it goes around as
medical advice.
Yeah,
Nutrition advice.
Nutrition advice. To this day, it is a myth that carrots improve your eyesight. And this was invented by the British in World War II, so when asked how their pilots were so good at fighting at night, they would say, we feed them lots of carrots because the vitamin A is good for your night vision. And as you can see, it even worked its way into wartime propaganda.
Okay, I want to emphasize that nobody was thinking things through. So, you can drop nuclear bombs out of airplanes. Some lunatic was like, wait, what if we put the nuclear bomb inside an artillery shell and then fired the artillery shell? This wasn't just an idea, they really did this.
Wait for it. There we go. Just like Fallout, the video game.
So this was the M65 atomic cannon with a firing range of 20 miles. Yeah. So here's what happened was they stopped doing this. They invented missiles. Some lunatic saw this and is like, I like this idea, but it needs to be man-portable. So
Just like Fallout, the video game.
So yeah, this it's a plot point in Metal Gear Solid 3, but that wasn't a Hideo Kojima idea. That was just a real thing. The M28 Davy Crockett missile launcher had the first version had a range of 1.25 miles.
To be fair, that's a small nuke.
Yes. And then
It's
also like
small.
there were safety issues. The second edition, like the second version of this, had a range of 2.5 miles. And then like on this small of a nuke, there was no abort button. Like once you pulled the trigger on it, the nuke was going off. This idea is absolutely ridiculous, incredibly unsafe, and they canceled the project immediately after, by which I mean they built over 2,000 of these and had them deployed until 1971.
Yeah. I mean, this is the Cold War. It was just nukes on everything.
They also made an air-to-air missile with a nuke in it, the AIM-26, with a 250-ton yield, apparently if you wanted to shoot down an entire bomber squadron in one shot. Fortunately, you know, due to like political pressure, we're like, okay, we can't let just anybody fire the missiles. We're going to install, you know, PIL, permissive action links. We're going to protect these. We're going to make so you can't arm the missiles unless you have the passcode, and we're going to use a very secure passcode, not something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I don't have a joke for this. That's just what the passcode was.
I wanna play devil's advocate here. If you're an officer, right, and you have enough credit to have the nuclear launch code and you can't give it to your guys, and then nuclear war happens and they're like, yes, you have like 2 minutes to arm all those nukes.
Yeah. So, no, this is what happened
punching a
was
bunch of
is
zeros.
politicians said we want this kind of code system involved, and then the military is like, we don't want this code system, so we will install it, but then we will set it to the password we want. So the Russians had a similar system. In Britain, their chief scientific advisor advised the government, quote, any weapons deployed need to be under some form of ironclad control. The British used bike locks. Specifically, they used a bike lock, and then you could use you could open the side, and you could use an Allen wrench to dial the missile in to the yield that you wanted. And when asked about this, they said it would be invidious to suggest that senior service officers may, in difficult circumstances, act in defiance of their clear orders. The U.S. had the permissive action links. The Russians had a system. The British had honor, and they had fewer near accidents than we did.
To be fair, we have more nukes.
Okay, fair, yeah. This isn't my title. These are the actual names of the US and the Soviet programs to use nuclear weapons for peaceful economic purposes. So on the left was a test site. On the right was a proposal to create a new harbor in Alaska by detonating 5 nuclear bombs.
Sounds good to me, yeah.
Extreme excavation.
There was also a proposal to widen the Panama Canal, to create a new pan-atomic canal for Nicaragua, and as well as more mundane purposes like cutting through mountains so you could build a highway faster. This actually was canceled in 1977 over concerns for public safety. This is what the U.S. did. Okay, I couldn't believe this when I read it, but I dug up a report from Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and I quote, on December 1st, 1963, while drilling gas well number 11 in southern Uzbekistan, control of the well was lost. This resulted in the loss of more than 12 million cubic meters of natural gas per day. In fall 1966, so this well had been leaking enough gas to power a city every day for 3 years, and it was on fire the whole time. Oh, and they couldn't put it out because it turns out that when they lost control of the gas well, no one logged how deep they had dug. So finally, in 1966, a decision was made to attempt closing the well with the use of a nuclear explosive. The idea being, like, okay, it's burning gas. If we fire a bigger explosion, we'll burn all the oxygen out, so it will stop burning, and it will collapse the tunnel, so no more gas leak. It worked. It worked so well, they did it 4 more times. If you want to look up the report, like I said, I couldn't believe they actually did it, but that's the report from National Labs, and these were like the 5 times the Russians put out a gas leak with a nuke. I mean, like, I don't know, maybe like not do really dumb stuff. Oh, Europe.
All right. So, lots of funny stuff going on in the Cold War, and getting away from nukes for a little bit, we got the space race here, and yeah, plenty of fun stuff to talk about the space race, and of course this kicked off in October 1957 with the launch of Sputnik, and of course everyone who wasn't Russian freaked out because they got to it first, so we launched our own rocket and it blew up on the launch pad. Yeah, great start. So everyone's concerned we're falling behind, we're looking weak. So what can we do to show off, really? And maybe I shouldn't have promised that there wouldn't be nukes here because there totally are nukes here. Yeah, so this is Project A119, also known as a study of lunar research flights. And basically, top secret plan developed by the Air Force. Someone had the bright idea, hey, let's blow up a nuke on the moon.
Specifically, right here, so everyone could see it.
Yep, right between light and shadow. So yeah, blow up a nuke on the moon. Everyone will know we got to the moon. There'll be no question. It'll be an awesome show of force. It'll look really pretty. Yeah, there's a problem here. It's a really blatant militarization of space. And
The only problem?
oh, no, not the only problem, because I mean, the moon's really big, right? So how could you miss? Well, what if you did miss? The nuke might swing around the moon and come back. Yeah, basically, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were our preferable alternatives to sending a nuke to the moon.
Something else I want to point out about this this project A119, a study of lunar research flights. I don't know if anyone knows his name, but one of the people on this was Carl Sagan. He was like a junior scientist at the time, and like I don't think he was in favor of it, but.
Yeah, and so of course, when we chose astronauts to fly to the moon, we chose the absolute best men, and of course they were all men, and they were very competitive. And rather, what word should I use? Macho might be a good word. And flying in space, you kind of have to put a lot of that aside because there's a lot of awkward situations you get in, like going to the bathroom in space. There's no privacy. Lots of awkward space moments related to that, but the one we want to point out today. So if you want to urinate in space and you are male, you use a condom device. And so you can imagine how this works. And of course, the condom piece, you have your own. And it has to be sized to you. Because if it's not sized properly, there's suction involved here, and it can go very poorly for you. But you know, astronauts have this swagger, and they didn't like that these were sized in small, medium, and large. And so, according to Michael Collins in his memoir, he said that they called them extra large, immense, and unbelievable sizes.
Much more heroic.
Yeah. So, moving on into some sci-fi stuff, things that we didn't actually accomplish, but thought about really hard. So, after we go to the moon, The plan was to go on to Mars, and eventually that got canceled because of funding issues and lack of interest. Yeah, boo. But it didn't stop people from thinking about, well, what would be even better ways to get to Mars? Because getting to space is really difficult. So in this example here, it's showing you that in order to get out there, it wouldn't really take that much energy. You could do that with one rocket. But if you want to go there and come back, you need a lot more energy and a lot more rockets. Freeman Dyson actually came up with this idea. See, we've got a very powerful energy source, and we've talked about it a lot here. They are nuclear bombs. So what if we built a spaceship on the back there, on the left side? You can see that's a giant shield, essentially. Though here it's called a pusher plate because it's attached to the spaceship on shock absorbers, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna spit nuclear bombs, not just nuclear bombs, they are nuclear-shaped charges. They figured out that we could direct the explosion so more energy gets pointed to our spaceship here, and we detonate these nukes, and the force of the nuclear explosion pushes our ship through space.
I want to point out that of the many reasons they canceled this program, safety to the astronauts was not the primary concern.
Yeah, it was more canceled because they wanted to focus on the moon landings. They didn't have a practical mission for it. Detonating nukes in orbit around the Earth creates electromagnetic pulses as well, so those tend to wreak havoc on electronics. And of course, fallout is an issue. Theoretically, you could use this to launch from Earth. It is not recommended. But that's not to say that nukes weren't flown in space. I mean, there was at least one nuclear bomb detonated in space, and it did generate an EMP. But nuclear reactors were also used in space, and primarily by the Russians. See, the Soviets had a disadvantage in the space program in that they were very far north, and I don't want to get too much into orbital mechanics, but it meant that they had limited options for where they could put their satellites. We had it a lot better because we launched from Florida, which is close to the equator. So the Russians would use these funny orbits, and they didn't have good solar panel technology, and there were a lot of reasons. So they decided, hey, let's use nuclear-powered satellites. So this was, I'm going to talk about one in specific, Cosmos 954. In 1977, was a nuclear-powered satellite, and they lost control of it, and it came down in 1978 and scattered debris all over the Northwest Territories of Canada. The good thing was this was something we thought of, and so they launched this Operation Morning Light, which was a massive cleanup recovery effort, and they were actually able to recover most of the material, just scouting with airplanes, guys with Geiger counters, going through like the Yukon and searching for chunks of radioactive material. And for the recovery efforts, the Canadian government sent a bill to the Soviet Union, about $6 million Canadian. And the Soviets eventually paid them $3 million. So, all right. Shifting focus a little here from nukes in space. Remember that giant bomber from before? So, before we had ICBMs, bombers were really key. And if you want to use bombers for retaliation, they have to be in the air. They have to be able to respond extremely quickly to your enemy attack. So the idea was we need to keep this bomber in the air as long as possible, and we need a fuel source for that. So how about nuclear fuel? It lasts a very long time. So they made a demonstrator, the NB-36H, and it wasn't nuclear powered, it just had a nuclear reactor on it. And So this was a technology demonstrator. Can we fly an aircraft with a nuclear reactor? And probably the biggest thing to come out of this was the development of shielding technology. This is the cockpit, and so it's got all kinds of lead lining and shielding to protect the crew. And this did fly, and it actually worked, but it was canceled because what happens if one of these things crashes? Like, I just talked about the satellite going down and spewing debris everywhere, and that's a small nuclear reactor. The airplane would have a much larger one. And so when they were running the test flights, they actually had armored and shielded bulldozers standing by. So if the reactor crashed, they would send this like digging equipment out to bury the reactor wherever it fell. And they realized that was not a viable long-term solution.
So we talked a lot about like using nukes. What about dodging nukes? So this was called Project Retro by the US Air Force. The idea was like, okay, Soviets are about to nuke us. They're gonna put up ICBMs, but like they fly above Earth and the Earth's rotating. So what if, as soon as the launch happened, we fired up a bunch of rockets to temporarily oppose the Earth's rotation so that the ICBMs would miss? This is a bad idea.
Oh, really?
So I don't know how much like history you know, but Ellsberg was a guy who worked. He's a guy who worked for Rand Corporation. He's famous because of the Pentagon Papers, and he summarized this concept as "we are in the grip of institutional madness."
I don't think I could say it better than that.
Okay. What about recruitment? So like, this is kind of a big topic shift, but this is a like pre-World War II Japanese recruitment poster. Like very, very macho. Like yes, this is like why you want to join the Japanese military.
Victory for the empire.
This is a relatively modern Japanese self-defense force recruiting poster.
Yes. Victory for the waifus.
So the quote I had here was like, they actually made an entire campaign out of this. And I quote, there were skyrocketing new enrollments. And they go, okay, Japan, like, I guess like posters are fine. It's not like they put their actual waifus on their attack helicopters. Okay, but at least it's not like the pilots dress up as their waifus. Okay, but at least they're not redheaded tsunderes. I'm just gonna say Japan wins, like, right?
Yeah. Man.
Vehicles.
Yeah. All right.
So this one is...
Let's see. So the idea here is you've got, say, troops or maybe a downed pilot stranded behind enemy lines, and you want to get them out. And so you could send like a whole recovery force, but the idea here was, well, what if we could make an aircraft small and light enough where we could just like airdrop it to them? So again, if you go to the Odvar-Hazy Center, they've got this thing there. This is called the Hiller Rotocycle, developed in 1953 for the Marines, actually. And it looks ridiculous and super dangerous, but apparently it's actually really stable and easy to fly. Supposedly they could train someone on this in 8 hours, and then, yeah, you could fly it around. It has some problems. It's really slow. It only goes about 50 miles per hour, so you could get shot down really easily. And it's actually so small and open, it's disorienting to fly because you have no reference. There's like no windshield or console to have an attitude reference. But this idea wouldn't die, and they kept coming up with different.
This was 1953, the Marines. This was the HZQ Zero cycle. This was 1954 by the Army. So like, I guess one of the major problems with this, like other than the other problems, somebody saw this and was like, the guy's got to use his hands. He can't shoot his rifle when he's flying this. So this was the VZ-1 Hanwei. This was by the Office of Naval Research. The the official way to control this was, yeah, you controlled it by leaning in the direction you wanted to fly.
Oh, man. So you're telling me they had hoverboards in 1955?
Yes. So there's only one. I feel there's only one way you can go from here. Like after you have this, you got to build the jet version. This was the Williams X-Jet. This was done in the 1980s, and like all of this was designed for like either scouting or like pilot rescue. The one other idea along these lines that I kind of liked, and I do have a little trouble saying the name of this aircraft with a straight face, but it was called the Goodyear Inflatoplane. And I actually really like this idea. So like the idea is like the wings are inflatable and the rest of this is like easily assemblable. So like the idea is like you have a packaged aircraft, a pilot's gotten shot down, you airdrop him an aircraft, they can assemble it and then fly themselves to safety. The main problem was it had a top speed of 70 miles per hour and it's inflatable. So the quote from the Army was, there's no valid use for an aircraft that can be brought down with a bow and arrow. We don't really have a theme for the rest of these, but this was the Tsar Tank. Huge front wheels. The rear wheel was 5 feet tall and had a tendency to get stuck a lot. This was the Brule tank, which had a blistering speed of 1.6 miles per hour. This is the Vespa 150 TAP. On the plus side, it's an air-droppable anti-tank weapon. On the downside, it's a Vespa.
Yeah, there is a more practical way of moving like a gun around, which the Swiss used heavily. How about you just tow it by bicycle, right? Yeah, the Swiss used this extensively. I mean, they never actually used it because it's Switzerland, but yeah, not a bad idea, honestly. And while we're on the topic of guns, let's just keep going.
So on guns, like I love the fantasy, like anime, whatever concept of attaching stuff to guns. The only one that actually really works is the bayonet. And like the origin of the bayonet was like when guns first came out, rifles or muskets took a long time to reload. So the idea was like you had people with muskets, and then you had a row of people with pikes to defend the people with muskets. And the bayonet came out of this concept of like, wait, what if we just like put a pointy bit on the rifle? And this is like where the musket came from. And like muskets are good. Like bayonets are actually like, they made a lot of sense until probably like modern, like fast, like repeating firearms. Like I said, this is the only one that's good. This didn't stop other people from trying. This is this was made in Italy in 1550 for the bodyguards of Henry VIII. This is the gun shield. So like, first of all, I do like this idea, but the problem was like, this was 1550s era technology. Back then, to reload a firearm, it's not like you put a cartridge in. You have to take your musket and then like pour powder into the top and then push a lead ball down there.
You have to load it from the front.
Yeah. This is a shield, so you get one shot, and then you have to like flip the shield around and then pour powder in to get a reload. The other idea that I had was 1838. This was the Elgin Pistol. The idea was like, let's put a Bowie knife on a pistol. And like the main downside of this is like, I love the idea of gun blades, but like you don't get an awesome pistol and an awesome blade. You get a badly weighted pistol and a badly weighted blade. How do you pronounce this? It's Krumlov?
Oh.
Yeah.
Krumlov.
Thank you, audience member. So like similar ideas, like ridiculous ideas like, oh, trench warfare. What if we want to like shoot over the top of a trench? We could like bend the barrel. So this actually works, but the problem is like you lose all your kinetic energy when going around.
And the bullets tumble when they come out of the barrel, but it still sort of works at close range. And he can actually see. He's got a little prism sight there, so he can see over the top of that barricade.
The version of this that actually kind of works is the corner shot. So this is used by the Israeli Defense Forces. The idea is like you put a pistol in this little contraption, and then you have a digital camera and then a monitor, and you can shoot around corners. So I want to emphasize, like, this is actually like a reasonable concept. It's not the best concept, but it's a reasonable concept. The unreasonable part was someone's like, what if someone can see the gun coming around the corner? We need to disguise the gun barrel, which led to the corner shot kitty.
Hey, if they hesitate for a split second, that's enough time to shoot them.
And then, also speaking of Israelis, the last weapon that we have, like the last greatest attachment ever made to a gun was, the problem came out of the fact that like on the Galil assault rifle, the magazines were just perfect for opening bottles. But if you do this, you like ruin your magazines. Israel thought like, well, we can either try to train everybody to just stop using their magazines to open bottles.
Yeah, easier said than done with a conscripted army.
Or we can just put a bottle opener on our rifles. And I feel like that's the best note to like end with MAGFest. Yes, take this lesson. Open bottles. Enjoy the rest of MAGFest. Thank you so much for coming to our panel on like Saturday night.
Thank you.